Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today's guest is Jennifer Roig-Francoli. She is the author of Make Great Music with Ease, The Secret to Smarter Practice, Confident Performance, and Living a Happier Life. It is currently out in ebook form as well as other forms, and it is a groundbreaking guide for musicians looking to improve their overall well-being and develop masterful artistry with mindful awareness and ease. She is an international prize winner and double certified Alexander Technique teacher, and she combines her professional experience with a lifelong love of meditation and perennial wisdom. And this unique combination gives her uncommon expertise in pinpointing the source of artists' mind-body issues and their solution. She is a former faculty member teaching at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, a member of Apollo's Fire, the Cleveland Baroque Orchestra, as well as providing teaching online and giving live workshops around the world. So welcome to the show. I'm so excited we can talk about your book and dig into all things music.
Thank you so much, Tammy. I'm really excited to be here with you.
So as a fellow violinist, what led you to decide to write this book that's out now?
Well, yes, I've been a violinist my whole life, and yet I started doing more and more with the Alexander Technique in my early 30s when I had some neck pain and some other issues that were going on. The Alexander Technique dramatically improved not only my physical life, but my emotional and life, and just everything about my life got better. So I became an Alexander Technique teacher in order to share these amazing things that I had learned. And over the years, I had this idea to write this book a long time ago. And this is actually my third attempt at writing the book. And third time's the charm, I guess. But I just had this burning desire to share the amazing, wonderful things that had helped my life so much. And in the book, I dive deeply into how I can help musicians overcome all kinds of challenges, physical and mental, emotional, performance anxiety, injury, all kinds of things that get in the way of really fully enjoying your musical life and your performance. So because I've been coaching musicians on these topics for a long time now, it was a need to get these ideas out into written form. And I've always been a bookworm, so it just was natural for me to write this.
I'm really excited about it. And even looking at the summary and the table of contents, I'm like, oh, I could use that chapter for me. I could use that chapter for teaching. I mean, there's just so many great resources in there. So I can't wait to pick it up myself and dive into it, especially because you talk about performance anxiety. And that's something that personally is something I really deal with as a musician. So
yes, it's amazing how common performance anxiety is. I have to say, I started performing when I was really little. I wanted a violin when I was 2 and got one when I was 4, and started with the Suzuki method. My mother, was a Suzuki teacher. She got inspired because she found out about the Suzuki method for me, and then became a Suzuki cello teacher. So I've just been around music my whole life. And it was very easy for me to perform when I was little. I had no fear. But as I got older, and especially as I started playing in a professional orchestra, I got a job in the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra many years ago. And that was the first time I started feeling real performance anxiety, even though by that point, I had already played as a soloist in Carnegie Hall. A couple times I had performed around the world as a soloist. I never got nervous, but then paradoxically, when I was playing, and the job opening that I won was in the back of the second violin section, where I really needed to fit in and not stick out. And that just was very challenging for me. So that's when I started really experiencing performance anxiety. That was way before I found the Alexander technique. And so once I found the Alexander technique, I realized that those tools could be incredibly useful to help me with that. And now I help all kinds of musicians, amateurs, professionals, any instrument, all genres. Anybody who comes to me who wants help with performance anxiety can find solace, in these tools, and solace and courage and confidence.
Yeah. And I love that. I wish this sort of book had been out when I was a student. It would have really helped me during like juries.
Yes. I have a lot of students actually who are preparing for auditions, even students who are already professionals who want to maybe up-level their career and get a better orchestra job. Or again, it's not just classical musicians, but all musicians who are performing, even amateurs who need to, they want to play for their friends, they can experience performance anxiety. Or even when they go in for a music lesson, that can be scary too. Just, It's all about expressing yourself in front of somebody and being that vulnerable and open. Even I know a lot of your listeners are probably not even musicians. So these tools are really very useful for anybody who needs to express themselves and wants to do that with ease and confidence.
What was one of your favorite chapters to write in the book?
Oh my goodness. That's a hard question. And it's funny because I had that thought in mind earlier today, and I was trying to think of what my favorite chapter was, and I really don't have one. But I will say that the book is in 3 parts, and the first 2 parts were very easy for me to write. Part 3 was less easy. And I think the reason is, part 1 is all about the challenges that musicians face. And it's divided into sections like mental, physical, emotional, those types of things. I put them into categories. And because I've been around musicians my entire life, and I've been performing for most of my life and coaching for many years, so I really feel like I understand musicians inside out. So writing about their challenges and going in depth into why people feel the way they do, that was really easy for me and fun. And then part 2 was quite different, because part 2 is about my personal journey as a musician and how I came across the Alexander technique, how it changed my life. And that was really fun for me to write and easy for me to write too. Part 3 is all about the practical solutions, the practical methods, the step-by-step, very systematic, clear ways that I help musicians. And I'm much more of an idealist, big picture, ideas dreamer type. So for me, the big picture and big vision is just easy to go into, that kind of creative spontaneity. So I think that's why parts 1 and 2 are pretty easy. Part 3, where I needed to be very specific about the details of how this work helps people. And I have exercises, and the big part of my teaching is based on touch-free Alexander technique called Primal Alexander, which is a system created by Mio Morales, my partner. And it's just a phenomenal system to help people help themselves, even if they don't have somebody in the room with them, which I think is really important. But writing down the specific details about how to do that, I found very challenging.
Yeah, because it's almost like having to talk about how you walk or breathe or something, because I'm sure it's so ingrained in what you do every day that you're like, wait, what, where, what?
Yes, exactly. And of course, when you're teaching somebody how to do something, you really want to be clear in your language. At least I do. I want to be really clear in my language. And it's easy for me to teach it live or go on a video and just speak from the heart. That's not difficult for me, thankfully. But trying to put it into the written word, like for time immemorial, it's like that was really challenging. But there's one other topic that I keep coming back to. It's one of my favorite topics, since you asked me what my favorite chapter was. I forget exactly how you said it, but like my favorite thing to write about. I love writing about creative inspiration and how I think about that and how I experience that working for me, and how I believe that it's not just musicians, artists, people, like again, I said before, it's about expressing yourself. So the work that I do, there's the Alexander technique on the one hand, but I've created my own system called the Art of Freedom method for conscious living and masterful artistry, which is really comprehensive. And I call it the Art of Freedom method because I believe that we have the freedom to choose our next thought and what we're going to create with our lives. And I get so excited when I start thinking about how all we need to do is get out of our own way to allow those creative ideas or creative spirit to flow through us. This is my favorite topic of all, and I get goosebumps every time I think about it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's definitely easier said than done to get out of our own ways and to just let the art sort of move through us, and get into that flow state.
Yes. And I think that is one of the most important underlying and explicit parts of my book. I mean, I also wrote this book to present, obviously, my view on how to make great music with these. That's the title of the book, right? So it's really how I've experienced it in my whole life. So I bring together my lifetime of experience as a performer, as a musician. And like when you introduced me, you mentioned my love of meditation, contemplative practices, perennial wisdom, tradition, all of that. I feel, that's the creative spark, the spirituality that I bring to it. That's the most important thing. And like you said, it's not immediately obvious how to get out of your own way, but it's actually not hard when you know how to do it. I mean, it's like anything. Nothing's hard if you know how to do it. But there are very, very specific ways that you can tap into that creative flow. And this book teaches you exactly how to do it.
Excellent.
The key skill that I present in this book, which it's called constructive thinking. But if you look up constructive thinking online, which I did a while back because I was curious what would come up, there is actually like a psychological term or idea that's called constructive thinking, but that's not what we are thinking of as constructive thinking in my work with the Art of Freedom method and Primal Alexander specifically. Constructive thinking in terms of Primal Alexander is really a very specific thing that you learn how to do with your whole self. It's a way of thinking that is actually thinking with less intensity, with more ease, and so that you enter a flow state. So that constructive thinking is a way to use your thinking, to use your mind, to get the clutter of your mind out of the way. And really what does get in the way of the creative process is our minds. It's our beliefs, it's our negative thoughts about ourselves or others. It's being in a judging, self-critical mode, or to be full of anxiety, fear, and self-doubt. All those ways of thinking are what block our freedom, blocks our creative expression. Learning to recognize when you're doing that to yourself is the first step. And then once you can notice how those thoughts are creating tension in your body, you learn how it's actually so easy. You can instantly let go of all of it when you learn how to do what we call constructive thinking. And when you let go of it, in that instant, the flow is allowed. It's like a river of, I mean, we're made for this. We're made for creative expression and ease and natural flow. But we've learned how to get in our own ways. We've even been, it's in our education, it's in how we were taught. You know, it's about, we've been modeled by our society and the people around us, often caregivers when we were young. They modeled how to not be kind to ourselves, you know, and how to get in our own ways, even though we're thinking that we're doing the right thing. It's a huge, complex, long topic, right? But that's what the book's about.
You teach and you give workshops, and what is one of the most common problems that students come to you with that you end up helping them through?
Oh, that's such a great question. Students typically come to me for one of a few reasons. Either they have a physical issue, like they have pain. For instance, a lot of my students will come with tendonitis, neck pain, back pain, carpal tunnel. You know, those types of things are very common, unfortunately, among musicians, from overuse and from especially misuse, like not really knowing how the mind and body coordinate well for optimal functioning. So those physical issues are a big reason musicians come to me. And also the performance anxiety is another reason, very, 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 very common. The one thing they all have in common, all of my students have in common, is that musicians all just want to become better musicians. You know, you want to improve your skills, you want to get better at what you do, and you want to enjoy what you do. And that's why in my subtitle of the book, I have, and living a happier life, because ultimately we all want that. So my students come for all of those things, but ultimately they really just want to make great music with ease and then, you know, enjoy being a musician, whether they're amateurs or professionals. We all want that.
And that's wonderful that you provide that resource to people, especially with technology today. You know, you can reach people all over the world, and, you know, you're not just limited to your local community.
I feel so, so fortunate to have this possibility that you just mentioned. I used to teach Alexander technique traditionally. The way people mostly think of Alexander technique is that it's a methodology where you touch the student to help them relax and find more ease in their systems. So I used to teach in person using my hands in that way. It's not manipulative, but it feels great, and it's really, really effective to help people overcome those blockages that we talked about. But I was I've always been very interested in how I might be able to do that for myself. When I was an Alexander technique student, and I talk about this at length in part 2 of my book, you know, my own process with the Alexander technique. The Alexander technique hands-on work dramatically changed my life. It was absolutely wonderful. I went initially because I had neck pain that wouldn't go away. You know, I went to the doctors, I went to chiropractors, nothing really helped. And the Alexander technique was like a miracle. I actually tried 3 different teachers over a number of years, but third one, it was like my last ditched attempt at trying the Alexander technique. But it worked instantly. And within a couple lessons, my neck pain was completely gone. And I kept taking lessons because it felt amazing. And my whole life was changing. And I was becoming, like, I fell in love with life again. I had not been very happy up until that point. And just my whole self changed so much. But I was very frustrated in that I felt dependent on my teacher, the lessons with my teacher, to create that change in me through touch. And again, I loved it, but I wanted to know how to do it for myself. And when I was teaching the Alexander technique at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, it was frustrating at the time that the way my program was set up was I was only allowed by the administration to teach my students for one semester, and then they had to move on. So there was a waiting list. Sometimes people were waiting like up to 3 years to get into my studio, because there was also a cap of 6 students, which is very small for my studio. So I realized I wanted so much for my students to feel empowered after the one semester with me. I wanted them to know what to do to help themselves after that semester was over. So that meant they needed to have tools, right? They needed to know how to think and move in a way on their own that was going to help them keep improving, keep feeling better, so that they could take that into their daily instrumental practice or vocal practice or their performance, so that they could keep improving. So I realized I needed to find a way to teach them less and less with touch and more with getting curious about how the way they were thinking was getting in their way, and to help them think differently so that they could get out of their own way and just let their natural creative ease and healthy systems work for them. That's what I started exploring, and it's actually in keeping with how Alexander himself discovered what later people called the Alexander technique. Alexander was born in 1869, so this has been around for a very long time, tried and true and proven, and offered at great schools like Juilliard. So it works. But Alexander himself didn't have a teacher putting hands on him. He needed to figure out how to solve his performance problem, which was getting hoarse on stage as an actor. He was using his voice on stage, would get hoarse, and nobody could help him get better. So he figured out over years how to help himself by thinking differently. And I've always been really fascinated in how our thoughts influence our body. Our thoughts are what create our reality, so to speak. The body is just a reflection of the mind. And so I've always been interested in that. And then when I met my partner, Mia Morales, he's a master Alexander teacher who's been involved with the Alexander technique for more than 50 years. And he's had a lot more time, and he's obviously a very different person from me. And he's figured out his own system for touch-free teaching over decades. So I had already been exploring that for myself and my students. And then I met him in Ireland at an Alexander technique conference. And it was so exciting to meet someone else who was interested in teaching without touch, because at that time, there were very, very few Alexander teachers who were not using their hands, not using touch. And it was actually kind of revolutionary. And we got a lot of flack for it in those years before the pandemic. During the pandemic, all the well, not all, but many Alexander technique teachers around the world were compelled to explore hands-free teaching. And now a lot more people, are doing that. But at the time, there was literally a handful of us who dared to try teaching without touch.
So you're sort of groundbreaking in that way, and going against the grain of the more popular aspects at the time.
Yes, absolutely. And that's been really challenging personally, but I've always enjoyed doing my own thing. And again, my work is called the Art of Freedom Method. And I enjoy that because it sort of gives me license, like artistic license, to explore whatever I want and feel free creatively and humanly to not care so much what other people think.
I love that. Do you have thoughts on future projects, now that your book is out, and what you might want to do?
No. I don't. This book has been so all-consuming for the last couple of years, and it's just starting to dawn on me that my book is out there, and it just feels incredible to have actually, manifested this dream of mine that I've had for more than a decade, nearly 20 years. I've wanted to write this book, and it's just amazing to me to finally have it out there. So I'm not quite ready to be thinking about next projects other than helping to spread the word about my book. I mean, that's really my job right now. And I love so much to coach musicians. I don't see myself not doing that, but being able to reach more people and help more people through the book is really my number one project right now.
Yeah. And maybe put your feet up a little bit, right? And kick back.
Well, actually, my mother and she just invited me to New Zealand for 2 weeks at the end of January. So that's my next project, is to go away to New Zealand and not think too much about work for a couple of weeks and enjoy what I hear is a very beautiful place. Nice. I love nature and to be outside.
Yeah. Is nature one of those things that inspires you?
Absolutely. Every time I go outside, and I make a point of going out multiple times every day, especially because I do work online and I'm on the computer for hours and hours every day. I do really make it a point to take frequent breaks and go for multiple walks a day. And every time I go outside, something shifts. We are so made to be in nature. It is so not natural to be indoors for any length of time. I think, maybe if we were living in igloos, maybe that's natural to be in there for many hours when it's freezing. But no, I think we're designed to be outside much of the time. And it makes me very happy to be in a natural surrounding. And I think something happens in the brain. I was just thinking about this the other day, because I'm here in Oregon, and we just went to the coast. I love, love, love the ocean. And to be in a place where you feel the spaciousness of the world around you, like not having walls on all sides, but you're more aware of the truth of infinitude in every direction. I think when you're indoors, it's easy to forget that space is infinite all around us. And it's very healthy to remember that space is infinite all around us. So it's just so lovely to go out into nature and be around other living, moving things. I recommend it for everybody as much as possible.
Yeah, I don't always get outside as much as I like to, because I live in Texas and it's always really hot. But during the cooler months, it's nice to go out and just enjoy the weather. And I really like to go barefoot in the grass and just like connect with the earth that way.
Oh yes, I love that too. And to be in the water is I'm really a water person, so I just love to be immersed in water and have water all around me underwater. Yeah, touching the earth and being really connected and grounded that way is very energizing. To be around trees and to have vistas and mountains. I'm actually Swiss, not just American. I have dual citizenship. So when I get back to the Alps, that's always very inspiring to be around mountains.
Oh, that sounds lovely. That's one of the places on my bucket list to travel.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I really miss it when I'm not there for any length of time.
Before we go, is there anything else you would like to tell the podcast listeners?
Yes, actually, there's one thing that I'd like to just share about the Art of Freedom method. I've come up with that system because I feel that everything that we do works better when we bring our whole self to it. And what I mean by that is to have as much awareness as possible of yourself as a whole. So I have what I call 5 life pillars of the Art of Freedom method. And those are purpose, mind, body, spirit, and artistry. The first pillar is purpose. I feel like it's really important to have some kind of sense of purpose. And a lot of my students, when they first come to me, they're not really sure what they want or what their purpose is. And that's totally fine, as long as you're curious. Curiosity is such a great key for everything that I do, everything that we do. As soon as you flip the curiosity switch, everything starts to get easier, whether you're in the practice room with your instrument or you're on stage. If you can go into curious and learning mode, everything starts to flow just automatically because we're made for that. So if you don't know your purpose, that's totally fine. But then at least get curious about it. Like, what do I want? And, in terms of my life, my big picture vision, or what do I want right now? And it always does come back to right now, because in that right now, it's the only moment that really exists. So the Art of Freedom method, Primal, Alexander, all the tools that I teach, and a lot of them we call awareness etudes, actually. They're actually designed to help you be present to yourself and aware and conscious with your whole self of what's actually happening to you in the moment. When you can connect to yourself in the present moment with curiosity, and I teach my students how to, like on day one, I teach them how to get connected to a sense of ease within themselves, within the body and the mind. It's very easy to learn. It's extremely simple. And actually, there are bonus materials connected to my book that are free that teach people exactly how to do this, right? So people don't have to buy my programs to learn this key point of constructive thinking with the awareness etudes. But that's all to say that that's really the key, is learning the mechanism, learning the practical process for how to be present to your own experience in a holistic way with your mind, your body, your creative spirit. And then the next step is, okay, how do I bring my whole self to my music making? How do I bring awareness of my thoughts, my state, my physicality, what's going on in me while I'm in the middle of playing the Tchaikovsky concerto in front of 1,000 people? And most people are like, well, I can't do all of that at the same time and be really present. Well, that's what I teach my students to do. And it's not hard. Anybody who's curious and wants to, devote just a few minutes to the awareness etudes on a daily basis is guaranteed to be able to do this.
Wonderful.
It's all about ease.
Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show. Listeners, please check the show notes for links to pick up her book, Make Great Music with Ease, The Secret to Smarter Practice, Confident Performance, and Living a Happier Life. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.